I'm Rebecca Carter, 30 years old, and I run a small flower shop in New Orleans. A week before Dad's 60th birthday, he called me, his voice warm yet distant. "Rebecca, it would mean a lot if you came." I hesitated but agreed, knowing family gatherings always left me feeling like an outsider. That night at a French restaurant, the air crackled with tension. My sister stood up, wineglass in hand, her smile sharp as a blade. Before I could react, she tilted the glass and crimson liquid splashed across my dress, soaking the fabric. "You don't belong to this family," she sneered, her voice cutting through the chatter. The room erupted in laughter. Dad, her husband, even my younger sister joined in, their eyes glinting with mockery. My face burned, but I didn't flinch. I grabbed a napkin, wiped the stain, and walked out, their laughter echoing behind me. That night, my heart pounded as I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My sister's startup had been leaning on my financial support for years, and I had reached my limit. I typed a short email, hit cancel on the contract, and sent it without a second thought. By morning, the doorbell rang relentlessly. I opened it to find her husband, his face pale with panic. I crossed my arms and said coldly, "Sorry, I don't welcome strangers. If you've ever felt belittled by your own family, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started." Growing up, I watched my sister Rachel soak up Dad's praise like a sponge. At every gathering, he'd beam about her latest venture, a flashy startup selling boutique dresses to influencers. Rachel had a knack for turning heads, her confidence almost blinding. Meanwhile, my flower shop, with its steady but modest income, was barely a footnote in Dad's stories. "It's just a hobby," he'd say, waving off my years of grinding to keep the doors open. My younger sister followed Rachel's lead, hanging on her every word, while her husband nodded along, his eyes always on the next deal. A couple of years back, Rachel came to me with a pitch. Her startup needed cash to scale new designs, bigger ads, a pop-up shop in the French Quarter. She leaned in close, her voice smooth as silk, promising I'd get a cut of the profits if I signed on as a silent investor. I hesitated, knowing her track record of empty promises, but I caved, wiring $10,000 to keep her dream afloat. Months passed, then years, and not a dime came back. Rachel dodged my calls, brushing me off with excuses about cash flow issues. Dad, of course, never questioned her. He'd just nod, saying, "She's got big plans." This birthday party for Dad was Rachel's stage. She'd booked the fanciest French restaurant in New Orleans, with chandeliers sparkling and waiters gliding like they were in a ballet. Every detail screamed her name: the custom menu cards, the jazz quartet she hired, even the floral centerpieces she'd ordered from a rival shop, not mine. I spent days crafting a bouquet for Dad, a mix of lilies and roses, each stem chosen with care. When I handed it to him, he barely glanced at it, setting it aside on a crowded table. Then Rachel swept in, presenting a sleek leather briefcase engraved with Dad's initials. His face lit up, and he hugged her, calling it perfect for a man of my stature. The room clapped, and I felt my chest tighten, my gift forgotten in the glow of her performance. I'd always known my place in the family, but that night it hit differently. Rachel's every move was calculated, from the way she toasted Dad to the way she steered conversations to her startup's bright future. She made sure every guest knew she was the star, her laughter louder, her stories grander. My younger sister trailed her, echoing her jokes, while her husband sipped wine, smirking at Rachel's flair. I sat quietly, watching the room orbit around her, my hands folded in my lap. I'd brought a backup dress in case of spills, a habit from years of being the practical one. I didn't expect to need it so soon. Rachel's planning went beyond the menu and music. She'd orchestrated the evening to make me feel small, to remind me I'd never measure up. Dad's indifference stung, but it wasn't new. He'd always seen Rachel as the one with ambition, while I was just the one who got by. I sipped my water, avoiding the wine, knowing I needed a clear head. I caught Rachel's glance across the table, her eyes sharp like she was waiting for something. I didn't know then what she had planned, but the air felt heavy, like a storm about to break. Halfway through Dad's birthday dinner with the clink of glasses filling the French restaurant, Rachel stood, her wine glass tilted at a dangerous angle. Her lips curled into a smirk, and before I could move, she flicked her wrist. Red wine splashed across my dress, a cold shock against my skin. "You don't belong to this family," she said, her voice sharp enough to silence the table. Laughter broke out, jagged and cruel. Her husband let out a loud guffaw, leaning back in his chair, while Dad just looked away, his face unreadable. My younger sister Jessica gave a nervous chuckle, her eyes darting to the floor like she wasn't sure she should be laughing. The other guests, Dad's old colleagues, a few cousins joined in their amusement, a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't scream or cry. I grabbed a napkin from the table, dabbing at the spreading stain, my hand steady, despite the heat rising in my face. Rachel leaned forward, her smile widening, daring me to react. I met her gaze, my expression blank, and pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood on the floor cut through the laughter. Without a word, I walked out, my heels clicking on the polished tiles, their eyes boring into my back. I could still hear Rachel's voice mocking as the restaurant door swung shut behind me. In my car, I sat for a moment, the streetlights casting shadows on the dashboard. The humiliation wasn't new, but tonight it crystallized into something else: clarity. I'd spent years trying to fit into a family that saw me as less, always the one who didn't measure up. Rachel's stunt wasn't just a prank, it was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. I drove home, the city lights blurring past, my mind racing but calm. I knew what I had to do. At my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and opened my laptop. The contract for Rachel's startup stared back at me, a digital chain I'd let bind me for too long. She'd begged for my investment years ago, promising profits that never came. My $10,000 had propped up her boutique dresses, her social media campaigns, her so-called empire, while she dismissed my flower shop as a cute side hustle. I scrolled to the bottom of the agreement, my finger hovering over the keyboard. The terms were clear. I could withdraw my funding with a single notice. I typed a short email: professional but final, effective immediately. I'm terminating my investment in your company. I hit send, the soft click of the key louder than the laughter from the restaurant. The weight didn't lift, but something shifted. I wasn't just cutting a financial tie, I was severing years of being overlooked, of swallowing my pride to keep the peace. Rachel's startup relied on my money to stay afloat. Without it, her supply chain would stall. Her orders would pile up, and her investors would start asking questions. I could already imagine her checking her email, her face twisting as she realized her safety net was gone. I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, not begging for scraps at a table where I'd never been welcome. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind replaying the dinner, Rachel's smirk, Dad's silence. But I wasn't angry. Anger would have been too easy. This was something colder, sharper, a resolve I hadn't known I had. I thought about Jessica's hesitant laugh, how she'd looked away like she knew something was wrong but couldn't break free from Rachel's orbit. I wondered if she'd ever see through her sister's act. As for Dad, his silence spoke louder than any words. He'd chosen his side long ago, and it wasn't mine. By noon the next day, my brother-in-law, Andrew Parker, was at my doorstep, his face all business. He didn't knock gently. His fist pounded the door like he owned the place. I opened it, leaning against the frame, my arms crossed. Andrew's tie was loose, his jaw tight, and his eyes darted with barely concealed panic. "You need to reinstate that contract," he said, his voice clipped, skipping any pretense of politeness. "Rachel's business can't function without your money. You know that." Not a word about the dinner. No apology for the humiliation. Just a demand, as if I owed them my life's savings. I stared at him, my expression flat. "You're standing on my porch asking for favors. After last night," I said, my tone sharp. He shifted his weight, muttering about business priorities, but I cut him off. "I'm done bailing her out." I shut the door, his protests muffled behind it. Back inside, I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and determination. Something about Andrew's urgency felt off, like there was more at stake than he was letting on. 2 days later, I pulled up the security app for my flower shop, a precaution I'd installed after a string of petty thefts in the neighborhood. The footage loaded, and my stomach dropped. At 2 a.m., Rachel and a hooded figure stood outside my shop, cans of red spray paint in their hands. They scrawled fraud in jagged letters across the storefront, the paint dripping like blood. Then Rachel grabbed a brick, smashing 3 display windows with deliberate swings, glass shattering onto the sidewalk. Her friend tossed bags of rotting food and broken bottles into my outdoor flower display, ruining rows of tulips and daisies I'd spent weeks arranging. The footage ended, and I sat there, my breath shallow, replaying the betrayal. I grabbed my camera and drove to the shop, the morning sun harsh against the wreckage. The red paint screamed across the facade, the broken windows gaped like wounds, and the stench of spoiled food hit me before I even stepped out of the car. I snapped photos of every detail: the jagged glass, the smeared letters, the crushed petals buried under trash. A neighbor sweeping her stoop shook her head and said, "I saw 2 people running off last night, but it was too dark to tell who." I nodded, my jaw tight, already calculating. The damage would cost at least $10,000 to repair, new windows, paint removal, replacing the ruined stock. This wasn't just vandalism. It was personal, a calculated strike to hit me where it hurt most. I called my lawyer, Thomas Reed, from the shop, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. I'd met Thomas years ago when I'd needed help with a lease dispute, and his calm, no-nonsense approach had stuck with me. "I need you to look at something," I said, emailing him the security footage and photos. He called back within the hour, his tone grim. "This is clear-cut vandalism, possibly tied to your contract termination," he said. "We can file a lawsuit against Rachel for property damage. The footage is damning." I paced the shop, stepping over broken glass, and told him to start drafting the papers. "I want her to answer for this," I said, my words clipped but firm. As I hung up, I thought about Dad, how he'd stayed silent at the dinner, letting Rachel's antics slide. I wondered if he'd care about this, or if he'd find a way to excuse her again. Jessica crossed my mind too, her hesitant laugh at the party, the way she'd looked away. Maybe she wasn't as deep in Rachel's camp as I'd thought, but I pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about them anymore. Rachel had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I locked up the shop, the photos saved on my phone, and drove home, my mind set on the fight ahead. That evening, I called Thomas, and he was ready to fight. I sat at my kitchen table, my phone pressed to my ear as he reviewed the evidence I'd sent earlier. "This is a strong case," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We can file a civil suit against Rachel for property damage and seek full compensation for the losses at your shop, plus punitive damages to deter her from pulling this again." He explained the process: filing in local court, serving papers, and pushing for a quick resolution given the clear proof. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping the table. "Let's move forward," I told him. "I want her to answer for what she did." Thomas promised to have the paperwork ready by morning, his confidence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. Before I could set my phone down, it buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Heard something happened at your shop," she wrote. Was it really Rachel? Her message caught me off guard. She'd never questioned Rachel's actions before. I typed back, keeping it short. "The evidence points to her." "It's bad." Jessica replied almost instantly. "That doesn't sound like her." Or maybe it does. Her words hinted at doubt, like she was starting to see through Rachel's polished facade. I didn't press her, but her hesitation felt like a small victory, a sign she might not stay blindly loyal forever. I stared at her message, wondering if she'd finally break free from Rachel's influence. The next day, I drove to Thomas's office in downtown New Orleans, a modest space with stacks of legal files lining the walls. He slid a thick document across his desk, the lawsuit spelled out in precise terms: compensation for $10,000 in damages, plus costs for lost business due to the shop's closure during repairs. I read through it, the weight of each word sinking in. This wasn't just about money, it was about drawing a line Rachel couldn't cross again. I signed the forms, my signature sharp and deliberate, and Thomas filed them with the court that afternoon. Rachel will be served by tomorrow. He said, his eyes steady. This is just the beginning. By evening, word of the incident had started rippling through the community. A local florist who'd stopped by my shop to drop off supplies posted about the damage on a neighborhood app, not naming Rachel, but mentioning the ugly mess left behind. Comments flooded in, some expressed shock, others curiosity about who was responsible. A regular customer messaged me, "People are talking about your shop. Hope you're okay." I didn't reply, but the chatter was growing. Rachel's social media, usually a showcase of her startup's glamour, had gone quiet, a sign she was feeling the pressure. A vendor I knew from the French Quarter Market called, saying she'd heard whispers about Rachel at a local coffee shop, words like reckless and malicious floating around. I could sense Rachel's unease from a distance, though she hadn't reached out yet. Thomas had warned me she might try to spin the story, maybe even paint herself as the victim. "Stay focused," he advised. "She'll feel the heat soon enough." I nodded, picturing Rachel scrolling through the neighborhood posts, her confidence cracking. Dad's face flashed in my mind. Would he call to defend her like always? I doubted it, but the thought lingered. Jessica's text, though, gave me a flicker of hope. Her doubt was new, a shift I hadn't seen coming. As I left Thomas's office, the signed lawsuit in my bag, I felt a quiet strength building, like I was finally taking back control. A few days later, a shaky voicemail from Karen Walsh, a former employee of Rachel, changed everything. I played it on speaker, her voice trembling, as she said she'd worked for Rachel's startup until last year and had something urgent to share. "I have documents," she whispered. "They show Rachel used your name for fake invoices and an unauthorized loan." I called her back, my pulse quickening. Karen explained she'd found files showing Rachel had forged my signature on invoices for supplies, never delivered, pocketing thousands. She'd also taken a $20,000 loan in my name without my knowledge, claiming it was for her boutique. Karen had kept copies, fearing Rachel's shady dealings would come back to haunt her. I couldn't stay silent anymore, she said, promising to send the evidence. That afternoon, Jessica showed up at my apartment, her face pale and her hands fidgeting. "I need to talk," she said, stepping inside. She sat on my couch, her voice low but steady. "Rachel made me keep quiet about her money problems," she admitted. "She said it was to protect the family, but I saw how she twisted things, especially with you." Jessica's eyes met mine, and for the first time she wasn't hiding behind Rachel's shadow. "I'm on your side," she said firmly. What she did was wrong. Her words hit me hard, not just her support, but her confession about Rachel's pressure. I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." I forwarded Karen's documents to Thomas that evening, my fingers steady as I attached the files. He called me within hours, his voice sharp with focus. "This is explosive," he said. "Rachel's actions aren't just vandalism, they're fraud. We can amend the lawsuit to include these charges, which will hit her harder." He outlined the new accusations: forgery and unauthorized borrowing, each backed by Karen's evidence. "This could lead to criminal charges if the court pushes it," he added. I told him to go ahead, my resolve unshaken. "Add it all," I said. "She needs to face the full weight of this." Thomas promised to file the amended lawsuit by the next day, increasing the pressure on Rachel's crumbling empire. That night, my phone lit up with a text from Andrew. "You're making a mistake," it read. "Drop this lawsuit or you'll regret it." His words were blunt, a desperate attempt to intimidate me. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent years bending to keep the peace, but not anymore. I typed back, "Threats won't change the truth." Then I blocked his number. My hands steady. Rachel's schemes were unraveling, and Andrew's message only proved how deep they were in. I thought about Dad, wondering if he'd heard about the lawsuit yet. Would he try to mediate like he always did for Rachel? I doubted he'd sway me now. Jessica's support lingered in my mind as I lay awake that night. She'd always been the quiet one caught between Rachel's charisma and Dad's favoritism. Her choice to stand with me felt like a turning point, a crack in the family dynamic I'd never thought would shift. Karen's evidence was another blow one Rachel couldn't dodge. The community was already buzzing, and now with fraud added to the mix, Rachel's reputation was on the line. I pictured her checking her emails, seeing the new charges, her usual confidence replaced by panic. As I closed my eyes, I felt a strange calm, not victory, not yet, but the certainty that I was finally fighting back on my terms. One evening, the doorbell rang and I saw Rachel standing there. Her face was drawn, her usual poise replaced by a nervous twitch in her eyes. I opened the door, keeping my expression cold. "Please," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Can we talk? For the sake of our family, drop the lawsuit." She clasped her hands, her words dripping with desperation. "We can work this out privately." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, and let the silence stretch. Her excuse felt hollow, a last-ditch effort to save herself. "Sorry, I don't welcome strangers," I said, my tone flat, echoing her cruelty from that night at the restaurant. Her face crumpled, but I shut the door before she could respond. The click of the lock final. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. Rachel had taken to social media, posting a long rant on her startup's page. She called me a family wrecker, claiming I was tearing us apart with baseless accusations to ruin her business. The post was a calculated move, painting her as the victim to win sympathy. She'd tagged mutual acquaintances, fishing for support, her words polished but venomous. I scrolled through the comments, my jaw tight. Some people bought her story, leaving messages of encouragement, but others weren't so quick to believe her. A local vendor I knew commented, "This doesn't add up. What's the full story?" Another acquaintance wrote, "Sounds like there's more to this." The doubt was spreading, and Rachel's grip on her narrative was slipping. I called Thomas that afternoon, my voice steady, as I told him about Rachel's post. "She's trying to turn this around on me," I said, forwarding him a screenshot. He didn't hesitate. "This is defamation," he said, his tone sharp. "She's publicly accusing you of falsehoods to damage your reputation. We can add this to the lawsuit, slander on top of the existing charges." He explained that her post, especially with its wide reach, strengthened our case. "I'll draft the amendment today," he said. "We're building a solid front for the court date." I thanked him, my resolve hardening. Rachel's attempt to sway public opinion was backfiring, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the truth. By evening, the online chatter had grown louder. A friend from the market texted me saying she'd seen Rachel's post but didn't buy it. "Too many people know what's been going on," she wrote. Another neighbor messaged, "Rachel's story sounds rehearsed. You've got supporters here." Their words were a small comfort, but the real shift was in the community's response. Rachel's polished image, built on years of charm, was cracking under scrutiny. Her post had meant to rally a crowd, but it was turning against her, with more comments questioning her version of events than defending her. I could imagine her refreshing the page, watching her plan unravel, her confidence shaken. I thought about Dad, wondering if he'd seen Rachel's post or heard about the growing backlash. Would he call, trying to smooth things over like he always did? Jessica's support from our last talk lingered in my mind. She'd chosen my side, and that choice felt like a lifeline. Karen's evidence had given us leverage, and now Rachel's own words were adding weight to our case. As I sat in my apartment, the city's hum filtering through the window, I felt a quiet strength. Thomas was preparing for the courtroom, and I was ready to face whatever Rachel threw next, knowing the truth was on my side. 1 month later, after weeks of tension, I faced Rachel in the courtroom, where the truth had nowhere left to hide. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped, as the judge delivered the verdict. Rachel and Andrew were ordered to pay $25,000 for the damages, fraud, and defamation they'd inflicted. The gavel struck, and Rachel's face drained of color, her polished confidence gone. Her fashion startup, once propped up by lies and borrowed money, collapsed under the weight of the ruling. No investors would touch it now, and her suppliers had already started pulling out, unwilling to be tied to her tarnished name. Andrew, sitting beside her, stared at the floor, his own business prospects crumbling as banks rejected his contract applications, citing his involvement in the scandal. A tax audit loomed over them both, their financial web unraveling under scrutiny. The fallout didn't stop there. Rachel's reputation in the community was in tatters. Local business owners, once swayed by her charm, turned away, refusing her pitches for loans or partnerships. Whispers followed her. People talked about her actions at the market, in cafes, and on neighborhood forums. She'd lost the trust she'd spent years building, and no amount of spin could fix it. Andrew faced his own reckoning, his professional network shrinking as colleagues distanced themselves. Even Dad felt the ripple effects. His unwavering support for Rachel had painted him as biased, and the community's respect for him faded. He hadn't reached out to me since the trial, and I didn't expect him to. His silence spoke louder than any defense he might have offered. Jessica, though, was different. She showed up at my flower shop a week after the verdict, her smile hesitant but genuine. "I want to help," she said, rolling up her sleeves. We spent days brainstorming ways to expand the business, contacting new suppliers from across Louisiana. Jessica's knack for negotiation shone through. She secured deals with 2 local growers, ensuring a steady supply of roses and lilies at better prices. Her support wasn't just practical. It was a bridge between us, rebuilding what years of family tension had broken. We laughed over coffee, planning a new storefront display, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a sister who saw me for me. Cutting ties with Rachel, Andrew, and Dad was easier than I'd expected. I didn't block their numbers or make a scene, I simply stopped answering. Their messages dwindled, and I let the silence grow. My energy went to the shop, to Jessica, to the life I was building without their shadows. The community rallied around me, with customers leaving glowing reviews and neighbors stopping by to check in. A regular client, a baker from down the street, brought me a box of beignets one morning, saying, "You deserve this after everything." Each gesture reminded me I wasn't alone, that I'd found a new kind of family in the people who valued me. Looking back, I realized the real lesson wasn't about winning the lawsuit or proving Rachel wrong. It was about valuing myself enough to walk away from toxicity. For years, I'd let guilt and family ties hold me back, but standing up to Rachel taught me that some bonds are better broken. My shop was thriving, my heart was lighter, and I was moving forward on my own terms. I didn't need their approval to know my worth, I'd proven it to myself. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story hit home, share your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe for more.